Welcome to another edition of the Daily Night. I'm your host, Brian Smith, and I am joined by Stephen Leonard once again, here to talk a little recruiting and specifically the position of linebacker. Stephen, thank you for joining the show once again. How you doing tonight, my friend?
Pretty good. Getting in the swing of recruiting as well as going through finals right now. So
that's why I always tell you, better you than me. Anyway, I've got my master's. I'm never taking a class again. I have no need. Well, tonight, you and I are challenged with at least giving some semblance of an outline, and I think that's about as far as one can go with not only what UCF has on its roster and some of the things that they have going on in recruiting, but painting a picture forward is recruiting in a nutshell. We both think that 3 is kind of the bottom end number, but let's move back a class and talk about the couple of kids they signed because it's kind of complex there as well because each class builds upon the one prior. Cameron Moore comes in from Seminole. They like him. He can play a different kind of role than a lot of guys. He's very intelligent. And I know you've probably communicated with him some too. But he directed the defense for Seminole High School, and he's a tremendous athlete. Is he big enough to play in the middle at UCF? Well, not right away. So they need a thumper. They go out and get Troy Ford this year. So that's a good combination. One can play Will, one can play Mike. Well, they also got another young man that I'm also very fond of, Bullard, out of Berkeley Prep here where I live in Tampa last year. So that's that's how you work a recruiting class into the next. They already have a group that works together. Now they need depth. Now they need other guys to compete for starting roles. What do you think about the scenario right now? Which is the most important? Finding a Will, a Mike, or that night position? What do you think is most important for UCF?
obviously the night position is probably the most important piece of the defense, I would say, just in terms of how UCF uses their defense. But they have been plugging players in, like Justin Hodges played pretty well there.
That is true.
Like
he's a corner.
He wasn't the
basically.
perfect fit. Yeah, but he was.
But he did pretty good. Well.
Yeah,
I'll give him credit when that first time out there. Yeah. I remember when I saw Hodges. I'm like, I don't know if this is going to work.
I think just in terms of the raw numbers of like elite players out there, Mike is probably a more important position for recruiting, in my opinion, at least.
Well, it's just hard to find a guy that's big enough to be a thumper that can also cover against a 160-pound slot receiver.
Yeah.
Because what you're asking is just mathematically impossible. You can't give up 70 pounds and expect to run with a guy.
Yeah.
It's not realistic. So that is why you recruit a Cameron Moore from Seminole when a lot of other schools did not. Florida didn't even think about recruiting that kid. And I guarantee you he's going to remember that somewhere down the line. And that's why UCF kind of is traditionally, as you know, has beaten to its own drummer. They've taken kids that others didn't want, developed them, and they end up being good players. And oftentimes, like Gabriel Davis, professional players. So I agree with that. And here's a couple of kids that, Troy Ford, for people that don't know, just a little backdrop. He's from Calvary Day School in Savannah. I know him, you know him. He was at this past weekend. He was at the spring game again. Super kid. And he's a thumper. He's 230 pounds, give or take, but he can run. He's used to playing in 7-on-7. We've both seen him in 7-on-7. Having a guy like that on the field that can at least direct, he can definitely play downhill. He's very physical. Then he could at least be a part of the pass scheme and be a 3-down linebacker is hard. Now, can you get anybody to go with him? Smith is a kid they're after. I believe Stephen Smith, he's from Grayson High School, another kid from Georgia that is as good a program as there is in the state of Georgia and pretty much the South. He's that smaller guy that we're talking. He could play night. Maybe he plays Will. He's about 200 pounds, 6'1", 6'2". How many of these kind of guys can you take? Because they're the Harris twins at Lake Brantley, which is right down the road from where you're at. It's 30 minutes from where you're standing. How many of these guys can you take, and where do they play? That's the question I have for you.
I mean, obviously you're shooting for like 3 and 4 linebacker depth, probably the weakest spot at UCF right now. in terms of quarterback, you have 2 guys, maybe 3 guys that you're comfortable starting right now. Running back, 7, 8 guys. Linebacker, you have 2 guys right now, and then a transfer coming in May that you're comfortable starting. You have 3 linebackers positions. They're moving a safety up to linebacker to the 9th position in Devad Wilson to cover that. So I think you really got to take 4 guys.
I think counting a transfer
of numbers.
Yeah, I think they need to take 1 more guy at least for the fall, if not 2. Obviously, you can't change recruiting because we're talking about class of 23. They wouldn't play till the 23 season for that. But they got to take at least 1 more transfer because the numbers are scarce, and I'm being very kind. The Smith kid and all these kids, I've watched film, all these guys, they can all run. They fit what Travis Williams and David Gibbs are trying to do on defense. That's great. This year is going to be iffy to get through, even if they got 2 transfers that they felt comfortable with. And that's part of the roster they inherited, and then the transfer portal giveth and it taketh away. Losing Tatum Bethune was huge because if he would have been a senior this year, their linebacker unit would have been dope. But he's at Florida State now, so that's just part of the gig. What is there any other position in your opinion beyond linebacker that they are even remotely in the same spot in terms of depth like linebacker?
No, maybe the larger nose tackle position, but I trust
that's
Ethan
almost its
Hester.
own entity. Yeah, I get
So
it. That's a fair
feel like
assessment.
there's at least 2 deep at every position where I would be like, okay, yeah, no, they should start at like somewhere around this level.
Yeah, even tight end went from like Alec Holler, you added a transfer and a freshman that can play.
Yeah.
So, I mean, tight end took probably the biggest leap of any position on the roster. Last year, we were like, is Alec ever going to come off the field? He was beaten to death. I give that kid credit because walk on to starter is a great story. But UCF now, and Gus mentioned this, has done not just a good job, but a great job of filling holes. And he said, you know what? We hit on everything with all these transfers that we just brought in. And he's right. I was thinking about it. I'm like, all of them are going to contribute. That is unbelievably rare. So it gives me some really positive thoughts about not only, taking transfers, but some of the kids like Cameron Moore. I mean, a lot of people didn't recruit him, but they know how to implement a kid into their scheme and utilize that young man's skill set. So I'm hoping, and you don't know what's going to come available now in the portal. There'll be a lot of kids over the next week or 2 because of all these spring games that are finishing up. Some in the Midwest aren't done, but UCF is probably going to get 1 or 2, whether it's linebacker, I don't know, 1 or 2 more, and it's going to help supplement the roster in some capacity. I'm just glad that they were able to do that because if Malzahn would have come in at a traditional time and just done high school, they would not have been anywhere near what they were last year or this year. It would have been a slow go. I'm not saying they'd be as bad as a certain team that resides in the same city as me, but they're holistically worse. But UCF has benefited from the transfer portal really well, and now they're starting to augment the high school kids with them very well. Linebacker is the last spot. It's if they can just find a way to get through this year, because they, in my opinion, they should win the American Athletic Conference. Correct me if I'm wrong, that top to bottom, you got 2 quarterbacks, running backs loaded, receiver and all this. The linebacker spot, defensively, D-line's good, secondary's really deep. Linebacker is the one piece you can go. If something goes wrong there with an injury, a suspension, it could cost them games. Aside from that, though, name a team that you think is going to be better than UCF in the American Athletic Conference.
The only team that really comes to mind is like Houston.
That's the first one
because they have such an easy schedule.
Yeah, that to me is the AAC title game. And I mean,
one.
if they get beat by them in the AAC title game, it is what it is. They're a really good football team, and they got Houston players. Houston and Miami are probably in the last 10 years about the 2 best cities in the country. Atlanta's kind of right there now. But okay, I get it. But to get to the AAC title game from where Gus came into the program just a little over a year ago, it was February 15th of 21, I believe. I mean, linebacker is a little thin now, but when he got here, they were thin at about a half dozen positions. Now it's one. That just shows you the growth, and that's why we picked linebacker, because it's the one that it's goofy, because we don't even know how to project it. They just lost one of the kids that was from Arkansas they had in the first class. He's leaving. They don't know what they have depth-wise, and I forget the young man's name. You mentioned him to me off the air that they think is going to be kind of their thumper. But outside of that, like, they don't know. Anybody you would like to project besides Devad that, in your opinion, could either play the night or even in a dime package situation could play nickel that's a safety or something? Who do you think?
Justin Hodges could obviously play that position. We've seen
He's
him play
proven.
it.
Yeah, that's fair. Touche.
Kobe Perry could probably slide up there.
Perry, I kind of wondered if he was going to do that anyway. That's a good call.
Yeah, I thought he was going to play there. They ended up putting Devad there, which I think makes more sense for coverage. So,
yeah,
I didn't know what Kobe Perry's coverage skills were, but after watching him during spring, I feel like they decided he's more of a deeper safety, but he could probably play up there. Maybe William Wells.
Wells, I kind of wondered if he would end up at will in the dime package and or the night. I don't know where all he's worked around, but I'm sure they've tried him. I would hope.
He came in as a corner, moved to safety, and then played a little bit at night during the.
Okay. Well, that scenario is intriguing because you're saying the right words, because all that means they have athletes they can plug and play, at least in a bad situation. Kid sprains his ankle, God forbid, misses 3 weeks. That stuff happens. It's football. It's tackling, large men running into each other. You have to be able to do that. And at some point this season, somebody is going to get hurt. I won't say any names because I don't want to get punched or anything for suggesting so-and-so is going to get hurt. You have to find a way to help a position that's in need. I'm just hoping linebacker, above all else, is not that spot because they just don't have the depth. Because I personally don't think that most of these kids that are freshmen and sophomores, especially the ones that play in the box at linebacker, can take the day-to-day pounding in practice and then in the game as well for more than a few weeks. It's a different deal when you play college football and your shoulders are getting beaten on by a 325-pound man like Sam Jackson in practice. That is a big human being. That line is humongous. Matt Lee is small at about 300 pounds. That sounds goofy, but it's technically true. He's the smallest lineman they have. And he's also arguably their best, which it just shows football is still about technique. But if they can get through the linebacker situation, like Jeremiah cannot get hurt. He's the guy that knows the defense is going to direct everything. I'm sure of that. If they get Devad set up at that night position, maybe there's some guys that can help, but they didn't move him there just to do it for funsies. You know what I mean? It's kind of obvious that they're trying some things because they just didn't know what else they were going to grab. And now they got to get depth because he still can't play every down. So maybe Perry plays there part of the time. And when Devad needs a blow and everybody's got to come out of the game, maybe that's their guy. I think that stuff is fascinating. And
are you going to move your starting safety down every time that Newton?
I mean, the only thing is they have so many guys that can play corner and safety. It's a great problem to have.
Yeah.
They have like 8 or 9 guys that are really good football players. I mean, where are you going to play
maybe have them staggered some plays where sometimes Newt's at the night position and Perry comes off the field and they put in a safety so Perry can get some rest.
You got to rotate. I don't know how that stuff's complex, man. No, but I mean, your point is valid. But yeah, they have to do some of that stuff because sometimes the guy's just so good and so versatile. He does play more than one spot. Great running back might play at the spot. Corner might play free. Like Brandon Adams, I don't think there's a spot in the secondary Adams could not play. I bet you he could play night in a nickel situation because he could handle a bigger tight end or something like that. Because you got to remember, he's 6'3". There's a lot of ways you can conquer the linebacker problem because you got to remember today's college football, we're not running out 3 linebackers anymore. Those days are over. Nick Saban only plays 2 linebackers. and he loves humongous linebackers, loves them.
Yeah.
But once they got shredded by Clemson, he didn't love them so much anymore. And they were shredded. So now he goes with guys that are 230 for the most part. And instead of even using a linebacker at the night, he calls it the star position. He just has a safety there. He always has 5 DBs on the field at least. This just in, Nick Saban understands football pretty good. So UCF's defense is pretty much the same scheme that he does in terms of the personnel. I mean, the play calls are a little different. I'm just glad they have versatility there. So, Stephen, I'll open it up to you. Any last comments thoughts about linebacker and what they need? I'm just starting to learn a little bit about, and I'm going to do some film reviews or something. The Smith kid will probably be pretty high on my board. He's from Grayson. I'll do him in the next few days probably. But anything you'd like to add about your expectations for linebacker this year?
Hopefully they don't have a similar injury list to the wide receivers last year at linebacker.
Amen to that. That would be devastating, to say the least.
But yeah, they definitely should take 3 or 4, whether it's a couple transfers and 2 high school kids or 3 high school kids and 1 transfer.
I wouldn't rule out 3 and 2, to be honest.
And then
depending on the player. Yeah.
And then the next class, I know it's a little bit looking ahead. You have Ardarius Hayes, guys like that. UCF's in on some top tier guys.
For those that don't know, Hayes is at Largo High School over here by me. It's next to Clearwater. He is as good a player as there is in the country. He just plays middle linebacker. It's not necessarily as impactful, but he can run like a deer, and he's 6'4", and still has 2 years of high school left. So those on his schedule, good luck to you. But for Brian Smith, or for Stephen Leonard, this is Brian Smith. Everybody have a great night. Thank you very much for joining us. This is a lot of fun talking recruiting. We're going to try to do this every Tuesday. And hopefully we'll have some recruiting news coming up very soon as well. I expect 1 or 2 more commitments, I'd say in the next month. We're in that time of year where it kind of trickles out. So everybody have a great night. Thank you very much.